What you're about to hear is a first-person confession, based on true events buried by time and fear. Just one voice, from a lab that should never have existed. I was never supposed to speak again. The silence was part of the arrangement. We signed our names, burned the records and buried the bodies, metaphorically and literally. For decades I told myself it was over, that the ghosts stayed where we left them, frozen beneath the snow and ash of a war we lost long before the world said it ended. But they don't stay buried, not all of them. I can't sleep. The nights are too loud, and when I look into the mirror, I sometimes see someone else staring back. Someone younger, dressed in white, holding a scalpel. I know what I did. I know what I watched, what I touched, what I allowed. This isn't an apology. It's not redemption. I'm not that naive. This is a record, a final log from a forgotten corridor of history, from a place where medicine was used not to heal, but to erase, where human beings were turned into numbers, where silence meant compliance, and where one day, deep below the frostbitten ground, I swear I heard one of them speak, long after they should have died. And now you will too. They told me I'd been selected for an elite medical post in Manchukuo, a strategic hub for public health research. I was young, full of purpose, and loyal to the empire. They gave me a letter sealed with a crimson stamp and a train ticket to Pingfang, a quiet town in the frozen north of China. That's all it took to redirect the course of a life, mine and many others. When I arrived, the facility stood like a monolith on the outskirts of the town, clean, precise. It bore the name Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. There were smiling clerks, polished floors, official signage. Everything screamed order and legitimacy, but no one smiled with their eyes. A man met me at the gates. He didn't give his name, just handed me a pair of white gloves and said, "You'll want to wear these before going underground." That was the first time I heard the word logs. It came from a technician wheeling a stretcher through the hall. On it, a man, barely conscious, half naked, skin flaking from cold exposure. "Log number 78, the tech said flatly, still breathing. I asked why he called him that. He just smirked. "Because they burn when we're done." No one questioned it. The underground wing wasn't on any official map. We accessed it through a steel door hidden behind a water tank. Inside, everything changed. The smell, the temperature, the silence. It wasn't a hospital. It was a machine built to dismantle life. Rooms with steel beds bolted to the floor. Buckets in the corners, hooks on the walls. Cabinets filled with tools that had no place in any surgery I'd ever studied. The other doctors, I use that term loosely, were not scientists. They were surgeons of suffering. Some joked about which logs made the best subjects. One kept a collection of removed eyes labeled by origin. Another sketched anatomical diagrams with a childlike glee, coloring in the pain. I should have left. Instead, I was led into observation room 3. There, a man lay strapped to the table. His chest rose and fell slowly. A nurse handed me a scalpel and gestured toward the abdomen. "You're to observe organ response under exposure," she said. "Start with the liver." "But he's still alive." She shrugged. "He won't be for long." I froze. The man looked up at me, not with fear, with patience, as if he'd already seen how this ended. I pressed the blade. The first cut was shallow, but it opened something far deeper than flesh. Winter in Manchukuo is not merely a season, it's a punishment. The kind that settles into your bones and never leaves. I once thought I understood cold, but cold is not just the absence of heat. It's the presence of something else, something ancient, unmoved and watching. They used the cold like a scalpel. The tests were routine by the time I was assigned to Observation Wing Delta. The process was simple. Immerse the subject's limbs in tanks of near-freezing water, precisely measured, carefully maintained. The goal was to study the exact moment, when living tissue began to die. The flesh would blister, then peel, then split. Sometimes it happened quickly, sometimes slowly, but it always happened. One morning I stood before a boy, no older than 16. His arms submerged up to the elbow, trembling, not from pain, but from instinct. His eyes were fixed forward, his jaw sewn shut with black thread, thick as wire. I was told it prevented disruption of data clarity. But still, he whispered. Through clenched teeth and flesh that should have been mute, I heard it. Not a language, not a cry, just something low and vibrating, like a memory being recited. "Did you hear that?" I asked. The attending officer shook his head. "You'll get used to it. Phantom sounds, the nerves misfire, hallucinations." But it wasn't from the boy's nerves. It was coming from his eyes. They followed me as I moved. When I leaned in to check the dermal response, he locked onto me, and he smiled, not from comfort, from recognition. He knew me. "They don't scream anymore," said one of the assistants as he scribbled on a clipboard. "Saves on soundproofing." That night, I dreamt of snow. Not the light, falling kind, but endless, suffocating, weightless snow that blanketed everything until the world disappeared beneath it. And in that dream, it spoke, not in words, in pulses, in rhythms of pain. A throb behind the eyes, like something had been buried too long and was remembering how to move again. I woke up gasping. My fingers were numb. I looked down and realized I'd fallen asleep holding the chart from the previous session. On it, someone had drawn a pattern I didn't recognize. An intricate spiral of repeating lines, too perfect to be accidental. But I hadn't drawn it. The ink was still wet. I returned to the lab and asked about the boy. "Which one?" the assistant replied. "The one from Tank 3, the one with the thread." He flipped through the logbook. "There is no Tank 3, not anymore. We transferred those subjects last week." "To where?" He didn't answer, just smiled with dry lips and turned away. That afternoon I passed the tank again. The water was still, but on the glass, in the faintest outline of frost, a handprint remained. And I swear, just before it melted, I saw stitching across the fingers. There was a time I believed flesh was just material, tissue and fiber, nothing more. But flesh remembers. It holds grief, betrayal, and terror like a sponge holds water. And in that place, we squeezed it dry. The experiments changed. They called them surgical evaluations, but there was nothing surgical about them. No anesthesia, no recovery, just systematic disassembly, meant to study response, resistance, and failure. They injected agents that swelled the organs until they tore open from the inside. We were told to document pulse rates as blood vessels snapped like violin strings. Limbs were amputated, reattached, rotated, swapped. One man had his left leg sewn to his right shoulder, not for function, for fun perhaps, for data, they said, but we knew it was a performance of power. Some of us couldn't speak about it, not even to each other, so I started writing, a diary hidden inside the back panel of a cabinet in Dissection Bay 4. Nothing detailed, just words, fragments. Enough to remind myself that I still thought, that I hadn't become like the others. One evening, after hours of recording liver failure in Subject 92, a woman who never stopped staring at the ceiling, I dropped my scalpel beneath the table. As I reached to retrieve it, I noticed something beneath the edge of the dissecting slab. A series of letters scratched into the metal, barely legible under years of rust and dried fluid. We still feel. The letters weren't carved with a tool. They were clawed, uneven, brutal, with fingernails. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't, because part of me believed they weren't meant to be read. They were meant to be found. A week later, during a routine thoracic exposure, I saw something I still cannot explain. The subject's chest was open, heart removed. We were monitoring blood flow and muscular spasms. The organ had been placed aside for weighing, but it beat. Not violently, not rhythmically, just once. A twitch, a spasm maybe, except it moved when I said his name. I didn't say it loudly. I whispered it, reflexively, softly, the way you whisper to someone about to fall asleep. And then came the voice, not mine, not anyone in the room, but from the subject. Your time will come too. I stepped back. My assistant glanced up, puzzled. Did you say something? I shook my head. No. But I didn't need to, because something else already had. There was a lower level beneath the morgue, one not listed on the blueprints. You had to know the path to find it, through the old boiler passage, behind a false panel disguised as storage. No signage, no keys issued. Only senior officers had access, and even they rarely spoke of it. They called it Section Black. Even the soldiers didn't go there. The air shifted once you descended, colder, denser, as if it resisted breath. The lights flickered more often in that hall, though no one ever reported power issues. Inside were a handful of rooms, small, windowless, with walls padded in thick layers of unfamiliar material. Each one outfitted with a chair, restraints, a false mirror, and a reel-to-reel recorder embedded in the wall. No paper, no pens, just a place to listen. They called it psychological calibration. But what happened there wasn't psychology. It was something else. Something that left no bruises but carved new spaces in the mind. I was tasked to observe. The first subject was a man in his 40s, reportedly mute. He was left alone for 4 hours in the chamber. The recorder ran. When we played it back, he had not spoken, but someone had. A voice, distant, male, whispering words we couldn't identify. Not Japanese, not Mandarin, not Russian, just there. We dismissed it as bleed over, faulty recording, technical error, until it happened again and again. Each time a new subject entered, the tape captured something more. Sometimes crying, sometimes laughter, but always that voice. One evening, I stayed late to review recordings alone. The room was silent, but in the tape, I heard my name, whispered, drawn out, like an echo inside my own skull. I turned off the machine and left immediately, but the whisper followed. I began to hear it in the corridor, then in the stairwell, then in my quarters. I asked the guards on duty if anyone had been near the archive that night. They said no one had entered. I didn't sleep. 2 nights later, I followed a faint sound, barely perceptible, coming from beneath the observation wing. The hallway narrowed, leading to a door I had never seen before. Heavy, metal, sealed tight. I knocked, no answer. Then, a click. Not the door unlocking. The sound of something on the inside, shifting. I tried the handle, locked. I pressed my ear to the frame. Whispers, so faint, so layered. I couldn't make out language, but they moved like wind through broken glass. And then 3 distinct knocks from inside the room. I staggered back. On the wall beside the door, in a patch of peeling paint, I noticed something scrawled. At first, I thought it was a stain, but it formed characters, old ones. From a dialect I hadn't read since my grandfather's funeral rites, I traced the lines with my gloved hand, translating slowly. They live under your silence. I stumbled backward and ran. When I returned the next morning with a supervisor, the hallway had been blocked with storage crates and a broken water pipe. No door, no writing, no mention of Section Black in any document. But I knew what I'd seen, and worse, I knew what I'd heard. Because the whispering hasn't stopped, it just waits for quiet. The next phase was designed to be clean. No chemicals, no blades, just a person, a room, and a mirror. The order came from above. A directive marked urgent, sealed with red wax and no explanation. The instructions were simple: isolate a series of subjects in soundproof chambers, each with a single wall-mounted mirror. No clocks, no windows, no input, just reflection. The first man was placed inside at 0600 hours. No food, no water, just the mirror and the light above it, humming like a breath stuck in the throat of the room. He didn't speak for the first 3 hours. Then he began to mumble, not to us, not even to himself, but to the mirror, as if responding to something unseen. The camera caught every moment. At 5:12 p.m. he started laughing, not a chuckle, not hysteria. A steady, hollow, breathless rhythm, like a broken machine trying to mimic joy. He laughed for 6 hours straight. When we pulled him out, his throat was raw and his eyes bloodshot. He wouldn't stop smiling. When I asked what he'd seen, he whispered, "It showed me where I end." I dismissed it as a breakdown, until the second subject did the same, and the third. By the fifth, I stopped rationalizing. One evening, curiosity, or perhaps fear dressed in curiosity, pushed me to test the chamber myself. I told no one. I entered after lights out, locked the door behind me, and sat in front of the mirror. At first nothing, just my reflection, pale, tired, still wearing the lab coat I'd been given the day I arrived. I watched myself, adjusted posture, lifted a hand, turned my head. Everything matched, but the longer I stared, the less familiar the face became. The eyes were mine. But the rest began to shift subtly. Not in shape, but in intention. Like the version of me in the glass understood something I didn't. Then, without warning, it blinked. But I didn't. I froze. The reflection smiled, barely. Enough to curl one corner of the lip, enough to know it was no mistake. I leaned in. "What's on the other side?" I asked. My voice was steady, but my bones trembled. The room remained still, but in the glass, the image of me whispered. I saw the lips move clearly. "Not you." I stumbled out of the room and vomited in the corridor. No one believed me. They blamed exhaustion, lack of sleep, hallucinations brought on by overwork. But I knew the truth. The mirror didn't reflect what we were. It reflected what watched us back. And I began to fear that whatever lived behind the glass was learning. By 1945, the walls began to shake, not from ghosts, but from bombs. The war was ending, not with honor, but with flame. Rumors spread like rot through the corridors. Tokyo had been hit. Hirohito would surrender. The Americans were coming. We were told to burn everything. Files, samples, names, even corpses. They handed out cans of kerosene like medical kits. The archives went first, then the labs, the cold rooms, the underground, Section Black. I watched men feed fire with the same hands they once used to dissect. They didn't speak. No one cried. There was no ceremony, only smoke rising from the sins we tried to erase. I was ordered to destroy the observation logs. I went to the vault, alone, carrying my matches and a heart I hadn't felt beat in months. That's when I saw it. A box, small, unlabeled. Except for one thing, my name. Written clearly in black ink. A name I had never told anyone here, not even the officers. I opened it. Inside were pages, hundreds, covered in handwriting, my handwriting. Some I recognized, fragments of my own journal, but others I had never written. Descriptions of experiments I wasn't assigned to, reflections I didn't remember, dreams I never had. But the pen strokes were identical, the pressure, the curves, even the smudges. And in the final page, a single line. They need a witness. I burned everything else, not the box, that I buried beneath a ruined wing in the dirt behind the furnace. I told myself I was leaving the past behind, but the past does not stay buried. In the years that followed, I built a life elsewhere, a quiet one, no patience, no mirrors. And yet, I see them, in reflections, not always clear, not always full, but present, a silhouette in the glass behind me, a breath on the back of my neck when I shave, a twitch in my own face that doesn't belong, and always the voice. Just before I wake, just as sleep loosens its grip, I hear it, a whisper, low, familiar. You're not done yet. I don't know how long I've been hiding. The calendar on my wall no longer matches the one outside. The clock ticks, but I no longer trust the hours. Time moves differently when you're watched, not by people, but by what waits in silence. I left the facility behind, the uniforms, the records, the cold steel tables, but I never left them. Not really, because they followed, not with feet, not through doors. They followed through absence, through reflection, through memory, through me. I stopped seeing doctors years ago. They said the whispers were trauma, the figures were guilt, that the sleepless nights, the low hum in my skull, the pressure behind my eyes, were all symptoms of conscience, but they were wrong. It's not guilt, it's a presence. Watching, waiting, feeding on the cracks left behind by what we did in that place. You think the experiments ended. That fire erased the evidence. That surrender closed the chapter, but experiments don't end, they evolve. We unlocked something in that underground corridor, not a pathogen, not a weapon, but a fracture in what separates what we know from what we're not meant to. And it found a way through. They told us to forget. But forgetting is an invitation. So listen closely. If you ever find a place where no one remembers, leave. Because memory is not the only thing that returns. And if you're listening to this, maybe you're one of us now.